Hey, this is author A.L.McCarroll, and I'm coming at you from my desk in my room. And I am still reading you chapter by chapter of my first book of the Into the Void trilogy, The Pawn. And if you haven't already, I've been warning everybody at the beginning of these that if you haven't listened to the very beginning of this story, my channel has the first one, and you could go through all of them until you get to this point so that you don't spoil any of the story for yourself. All right, and with that, a little bit of an overview of last week's chapter, chapter 10. I introduced one of my favorite characters of the whole series in this chapter, the Baron. The Baron is awesome. I like the weird, crazy characters, and the Baron is weird and crazy. He's partial, which that is like an altered where they change their skin, hair, and eye colors, and they all end up matching. It's a chemical change. The Baron ends up only going through enough of it to change one of his eyes and his hair, and they're orange. So it's just a shocking look to him. And he's eccentric and wild. He's bisexual, and he has a obvious crush on Marcus Silver, who is like his mentor, Doc. And then beyond introducing the Baron, which I can go on and on and on about the Baron, I have Guinevere on the hunt for a new crystal. It's been a few years, and she finally finds out the location of one. And she still has Avenger nagging in the back of her mind, and she is still not believing that he is there. She's just in denial about his existence, and she is just so sure that what she believes to be true is true, and there's nothing else underneath anything. Because she's stubborn. She's just stubborn. Well, beyond that, how things are going, I've been watching a lot of romance anime. I just got really, really, really hyper fixated on going through each and every romance anime I could find on Crunchyroll. And there have been some really good ones and some really just blah ones, but there's so much good anime in the world. And beyond that, not too much else. Just every now and then you have like a good dull time, like it's sometimes good to just have a regular week and nothing big or crazy going on. So just enjoyed myself a time. And I hope y'all enjoy this time with this story. So with that, let's get started. Chapter 11. The next day arrived, and Guinevere boarded the air shuttle for Rural Zone 1283. The shuttle had an open floor that typically would hold up to 20 standing occupants, but she had paid extra so that she would be the only one on board the shuttle for the entire flight. In addition, the shuttle operated remotely, so not even a pilot would know where she was going. Guinevere watched the paths shrink to tiny gray capillaries below the air shuttle. Soon she would see areas without the typical charcoal-colored shuttle transportation paths. The paths further out from the megalopolis were remnants of the gray concrete or asphalt old-world roads. It would have taken generations of hard labor to take out even a portion of these vast roads their ancestors had laid out. There were remains of them scattered across the unused rural zones. Finally, the shuttle descended towards a desert landscape covered in a reddish-yellow sand. As the ground began to come into view, she could see a temporary base nested in the hot desert. The building looked similar to the temporary base they had used on Titania. Workers were walking in and out, tiny as ants. The air shuttle settled down close to the base, and as it did, Guinevere could see a man standing nearby, waiting for her to arrive. This man was Sean McKinnon, an archaeologist and leader of the excavation team. He led her to the base, and she could feel his palpable resentment while he showed her around. She didn't blame him. She had told him in their previous communications about the church he had discovered and how he would not be allowed to set foot in the building until she could look first. Guinevere knew that Mr. McKinnon would have been able to build a whole career on what was discovered inside, and to have the first glances taken away by someone as established as her must have felt like a slap in the face. But on the other hand, if that was the case, he seemed pretty tame. Mr. McKinnon showed her around and gave her instructions in a way that seemed like she was a child. This church was thought to be fully constructed 800 years back, nearly 200 years after the destruction event. That is not to say they might have had a similar version of this church before the grand underground construction. She listened to him as he gave her a history lesson she already knew. The church was built below ground to protect the occupants from the dangers that could have been above ground. We know that during this time, if you were not in larger settlements, you were in danger of being attacked by savage, scavenging outsiders. They would steal your valuables or kill you for them. As he spoke, they worked their way through the tight hallways of the temporary base building. He had digital maps in his office that they would go over before he would show her where she would enter the church. The small, cramped building was alive with conversation and sounds of loud machinery. Guinevere thought they must be running tests on the ground and water as they entered the small office room. Above Mr. McKinnon's desk was a large, thin screen showing a map. He walked over to it and began to show her places on it. The church, when scanned from above, shows a space nearly 100 feet below ground level, meaning it is well below the water table for this time of year. Down there it should be very damp and a bit cooler than here. If you come across any stairs, they might be hard to climb from the moisture. If you need help, contact us over your comm. It should still get at least a low signal from that far down. Guinevere studied the map as he spoke. Once he finished, she looked curiously at Mr. McKinnon. Will you be providing me with anything to help during this expedition? Any kind of ropes, harnesses, lights, or masks? Mr. McKinnon kept a deadpan look before responding. A recreational facility such as this suggests a good-sized settlement must be nearby. So, if I'm not allowed this discovery, I'll keep the team on the lookout for that settlement. If you would allow me to, of course. Guinevere could tell what he meant to do, and she knew it would be nearly as good of a discovery for him. I don't plan on holding up any more of your excavations after this one. I am sorry to have taken this from you. Mr. McKinnon's poker face broke, and he seemed satisfied. I'll have one of my team members pack you a bag with some helpful items. Once supplied with a small backpack, he led her out of the office and the base. They were going to see the entrance to the church. The sun burned brightly on the sand-colored slope. It stood out ahead of them as it led down towards the area marked by bright blue flagging tape. She was amused by the color, imagining that the standard yellows and oranges would have blended in too well with the colors of the sand. Mr. McKinnon led her down the slope towards the large hole dug in the sand. As they approached, Guinevere could see a faded entrance door made of solid oxidized bronze. The green of the metal stood out almost as much as the tape. Above the metal door, set in the ground, was a short brick archway with the words Church of the Shard set into the red brick, the letters spelled out in the same aged bronze. Mr. McKinnon left her side, gathering others and instructing them to prepare to open the large door. Guinevere felt a quick shiver come over herself at the sight of the door, despite the heat of the desert. Members of the excavation team used tools to pull the door open, just enough for her to climb down inside. They took samples of the metal and dirt from just inside the doorway. Mr. McKinnon returned to where she was. He led her toward the entrance. "Here you are, Miss Matthews. Enjoy the discovery." He waved his hand towards the door in an awkward gesture of presentation as he spoke. Guinevere knew he really meant to enjoy his discovery. But she no longer felt guilt over jumping the gun on this team. It was just as he said. They would probably find an even larger abandoned settlement in the surrounding area. That would make this little building look like nothing. She pulled a large heavy flashlight from her pack and walked past Mr. McKinnon, through the doors and into the darkness. Guinevere walked through a long hall that sloped downward. Her flashlight shone a path for her feet as she walked carefully so she would not slip on the damp floor. The first room Guinevere came to opened into a lobby with several areas for seating and a dome-shaped ceiling. Every area she took in was painting a picture of old-world grandeur mixed with decay. A colossal mosaic mural decorated the dome. Lines of water damage that sent dirty streaks down from the tiles smudged the scene it depicted. From what she could still see, it showed a person holding a crystal out to a light, and the beam reflected from the crystal fell onto a cross. Past the lobby was a hall so long her flashlight beam couldn't reach its end. Guinevere walked through the entrance, only stopping to look directly up at the middle of the dome at the tile art of the crystal. It reminded her of the two crystals she had already found. She continued to walk through the dark, downward-sloping hall. Her shadow stretched long and thin across the floor behind her. Guinevere was astonished by how silent the underground building was, having just come from the excavation team's base with all its activity and noise. It felt like a constant background hum had become so normal to her. It was now being stripped away as she pushed further into the silent darkness. As she walked down the hall, it wasn't hard to envision the grandeur of this place nearly 8 centuries ago. Behind the peeling paint, moisture, and musty odor, the large old-world murals, decorative accents of oxidized bronze, and near-perfect solitude gave hints of what a truly marvelous sight this place must have been. After walking for a while, she could see several sets of double doors. They were still far from her reach in the powerful beam of the large flashlight. The hard, slick floor was already causing her feet to feel sore. With each step she could see thick mist in the beam of her flashlight. Guinevere reached one set of double doors. She pushed hard against the rusty metal bar on one side, and the shrill, creaking sound pierced the darkness, echoing all around her. She felt a cold rush of stale air as she squeezed through the opening she made in the door and shined her flashlight into the next room. What she could see at first was enormous and nearly as endless as the hall that had led her here. Then, as far as the beam could shine, she saw thick wooden church pews with open backs holding paper books. She took a few steps inside, and as she did, dim old-world lights came on, hanging at least 100 feet overhead. They flickered on and off, swinging from up high. It would have almost seemed like magic if she wasn't so logical and knowledgeable. She marveled that the lights still worked after this long, and tried to surmise why. They were set to turn on if somebody walked into the room, and maybe they were run off of a battery that hadn't entirely gone out just yet, or they could be solar-powered. With the small amount of additional light, she could see that the room was a massive theater, with thousands of dark wood pew seats stretching out in a fan shape. 4 long aisles led down to a large stage. The floor was a dark concrete, showing a few long cracks from settling. She walked further into the room. Looking around, she noticed more of the accents of oxidized copper mixed with mosaic art that stretched high overhead, depicting scenes of a bright light hitting a cross with a purple crystal. Outward from the crystal, different visions were projected. Guinevere strained her eyes down towards the stage, taking in the details of it all. The curtains were dark rich plum with golden accents, and the stage was a dark, smooth, solid stone slab. In the middle of the stage, just behind a dark wooden carved podium, was a large copper cross with the familiar purple glowing coming from its center. Guinevere began to rush down the aisle, straining her eyes to see the crystal set in the copper cross. She had missed the occupants of the first few wooden pew seats in her excitement. Guinevere had rushed forward in haste before giving herself time to look around. She came to an abrupt stop, realizing what was surrounding her. In many of the pews were withered bodies. Guinevere caught a glance of one in her peripheral vision. It made her heart give a jolt as she stopped in her tracks. She shone her light onto what had been a man. His arms forever reached forward into the darkness. Guinevere spun the light around, looking at all the people frozen in their last throes of worship. A woman reaching out as the man had, a young child resting in her lap in an eternal sleep. Her breaths were coming fast, and panic was about to overtake her as she heard a raspy voice. "Guinevere Matthews." She shone her light in the direction it came from. The head of one of the withered corpses turned its loving gaze away from the stage, shoulders popping with the effort. Its empty eye holes faced her as if it could see, and she froze in the moment shock held her in place. That's when the hissed out a long, raspy whisper. It sounded loud in the large open theater. "Guinevere Matthews." It spoke once more, making her blood run cold. Her first thought was that she must be hallucinating. There must have been something swirling around in the cold, damp air. That was the only logical explanation for seeing a dead body move, let alone hearing it speak. It tilted its head to the side and spoke again. "I have been meaning to have a word with you, Guinevere." The words became more precise as it spoke. "What better time, what better place than this, one of my many tombs?" She sat down in an empty pew, feeling as if she was going to pass out from her panic. She steeled herself and spoke back to her vision. "This is not real. I'm just seeing things." She said more to herself than the vision itself. The corpse laughed. It echoed in the silence of the grand theater. "I am real, Guinevere Matthews, but not as real as I would like to be. For that, I need more help from you." His words lingered as he spoke them slowly and concisely. They echoed through the large room. "It is about time that I properly introduce myself." As he spoke, it all clicked in her mind, and she felt overwhelming amounts of shame. "I am Avenger." The name came from the mouths of many corpses and rang out around the vast church as the lights that had been on flickered completely out. She heard fragments of the name bounce around in her head. This was Avenger. If he was real, then she had ignored his presence in her mind, and now he had her alone in the dark. Hey, this is A.L.McCarroll. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. Remember to give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, also turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Don't forget to follow me on my social media platforms for updates. You can find the links in the description box. Thank you again for watching. Stay tuned and take care.